Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits Show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits. And today we have Yan Meng from the SOLV Protocol, and SOLV has a remarkable semi-fungible token construct that I think is going to be really exciting for people who are studying things like NFT, the non-fungible token standard. So this is really an interesting part of the blockchain. As a disclosure, actually my fund, Gumi Cryptos Capital, is an investor in Solve Protocol. So with that in mind, let's go ahead. So Yan Meng, welcome to the Miko Bits Show.
Hello, Miko. Nice to see you. It's good to see you. And it's my great pleasure to join your show. And thank you very much for having me. Good.
Yeah, absolutely. So my opening question is always with the project, what is the
Yeah.
problem that's solved by Solve Protocol?
I always have, I usually have two versions of introduction of Solve, right?
Yeah.
A simpler version is that Solve is OpenSea equivalent, but for financial NFTs. So it's a little bit easier to understand when people compare Solve with like OpenSea, but for just a special class of NFTs, we call it financial NFTs. It's a simpler version, but we also have a professional version of explanation of introduction. That is, Solve is a protocol to tokenize and trade the smart contracts. So it's a little bit difficult to explain it. So I would get started from the simpler version. Okay. So the key question is, what is financial NFT? And as you said, what problem we actually solve by this new technology? So financial NFT in a word is the NFT representation or representation of a financial contract,
Yeah.
financial contract. What is a financial contract? Some people say it's a financial instrument, like commercial paper, like certificate of deposit, like the contract for a future, forward contract, the futures, options, CDS, CDOs, like that. Every financial instrument is a form of financial contracts, right? So financial NFT is just the NFT expression of that financial contract. So you see that we actually using NFT technology to represent complex conditions and intelligence of a financial contract. Is that significant? I think so. So this is actually a simpler explanation, a simpler introduction, and we have a more professional one. That is, we actually are upgrading the the smart contract technology. Smart contract is such a pillar technology to support the whole blockchain, right? So we are actually upgrading smart contract by tokenizing them. We tokenize smart contracts so that it can be visualized, it can be owned by somebody, it can be transferable, it can be composable and divisible. So I think we are doing something very, very significant, very, I should say, exciting in this industry. Yeah,
Yeah. We're also strategic seed lead investors in OpenSea. And,
that's
we
right.
do absolutely love to see this kind of emerging functionality that makes NFTs more powerful, right? So, we think NFTs
Yeah,
right
more
now,
intelligent, more
yes,
smarter, right?
yes, and more
Yeah,
and more valuable, right? So to me, the
that's right.
idea that a contract can be sort of fractionalized, that a contract can be purchased or acquired or transferred. Like this is something that happens all the time in the real world, right? So people take contracts,
That's right.
forwards, they take all kinds of like contracts and they kind of buy and sell, right? So commercial paper. So I think you mentioned these. So one of the things that is always super interesting for us is like, how is it going? Like, do you have like, I know I saw announcements about your customers and like some of their things they're selling,
Yes.
but I would love to get the examples so the user can kind of understand
Sure.
more.
Sure. Well, currently we have more than 30 business partners. Most of them are the DeFi protocol like us. So, the two product we have launched are vesting vouchers and convertible vouchers. Uh, among the two, the vesting voucher is a little bit simpler. So I would start from that one.
Yeah.
So vesting voucher, as I just said, that as vesting voucher is a financial NFT, and a financial NFT is just a NFT representative of a financial contract, right? So vesting voucher is financial contract. What financial contract it represent? It's a financial contract that guarantee to offer you a sum of tokens, you know, during a specific
Yes.
time frame. So in maybe in the future, in the next 6 months from now, you will get a specific number of token each month or each week. So
Yes.
we wrote the rules and we lock the tokens in this financial NFT that guarantee to pay you the specific amount of the tokens in specific time points. So that is what we are doing, we have done in vesting vouchers. So you can see
So
that this is, please,
yeah. So let me understand that, right? So let's
yeah,
say that I'm a company and I want to put my employees into token vesting, right? So the way
yes,
that we would do that is we would use your smart contract, right? Because
yeah,
if we allowed their employees to be getting tokens from that contract, then we can enable the resale of that. Is that the idea?
that's right. That's
That's
right. That's
interesting.
right. You know, as you just said, in the real world, we have contract, right?
Yeah.
But what is a contract? Contract consists of two parts. One part is abstract rules and principles, the algorithm, right, behind. The other part is that you will have a piece of paper,
Yes.
represent
Yes.
your rights of the
Yes.
contract, represent your access to the rules, to the principles, right?
Yeah.
But think about the smart contract. We call it smart contract, but it's just a piece of code abstractly sit somewhere in the blockchain. You don't have a representative of that contract. You don't have the piece of paper, the something that represent your rights of that contract, right? We actually use NFT to implement that. So that you hold that NFT, you hold the rights, you hold the access to the contract. So what's the point of that? You just make the point. In that case, you can transfer this rights to someone else. You can sell it to others. So in the example you just mentioned, as employee of this company, you can sell your employee options to others before the option matured, right? Option
Yeah.
matures. Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is really a lot like a forward contract, right? Which is typical
Yes.
in sort of options.
Yes. Forward
That's
contract. Yes.
fascinating. Uh, I have a question for you, and I'm sure you've talked about this with your customers, right? Which is, in
Please.
a way, isn't the employee vesting contract designed for maximizing retention? So if an employee sells all of their forward contract, right, then don't they can't they just leave your company then?
It's a very good question. We are always being challenged by questions like that. This is a valid question in vesting vouchers. Remember that we will have array of different products, different vouchers that solve different questions. So in other scenarios, that question won't be exist. But even in this situation, that I would like to tell you that our voucher enable one time send. So we transfer we as employer transfer the voucher to an employee, and that's all. He cannot transfer it to the second to the third guy. We can enable this, so we can support different scenarios, different requirements. But before us, you can't even enable resell. You can't resell. We now at least give you that option. You can say that I don't want that option, but before that you don't have that option, right? So we
Yeah, yeah.
actually enhanced the product. We give people options. But in scenarios, we are as our strategic investors, you must know that we are developing things like installment and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
leasing, right? So in those scenarios, you will see that we actually doing something that without any questions, without any challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not. Yeah, I definitely don't want to make trouble, but but representing my
It's not trouble. Yeah, yeah.
so representing my audience. So the thing that is so you've got like so how many like of this type of customer have you served? Like I'm curious about like you know people doing it.
Yes, yes. Currently, we have over 30 business partners, means 30 over 30 protocols or, yes, partners have
Great.
issued a vesting voucher or convertible voucher on our platform. And we have, issued more than 80 million US dollar worth of
Wow,
vouchers.
that's great.
But it used to be 240 million before the market crash. you know and and we have minted more than 8,000 vouchers, and we have
Wow.
observed yeah, we have observed more than 8,000 accounts who joined participate the voucher transaction. And now we have more than 50,000 people in our Telegram groups and Telegram group, and we have more than about 80,000 people follow us on Twitter. So I think it goes very well. Yeah.
That's very exciting. So you mentioned that you have a second class of voucher. So I'm curious to hear about the second one.
The second one is actually an upgrade upgrade of vesting voucher. We call it convertible voucher. So it's actually a mimic of convertible bond. So what that means, imagine I offer you an envelope, and in investing voucher, I enclose a certain number of tokens, and I set up a schedule so that you can take out some tokens according to our predefined schedule, right?
Yeah.
But in convertible voucher, I actually enclosed a variable number of tokens
Whoa.
in that envelope. So
Hmm.
how many tokens you can take out from the envelope is partly decided by the market price of the token.
Whoa.
So if
Whoa.
it's just like magic, right? So if the price goes down, you can take more tokens from that envelope.
Whoa.
So it's kind of protection. It's a kind of protection, right? It's a protection of your rights. So if the price goes up, likewise you will take a fewer amount of token from that envelope.
Wow.
But we have a range. So if the price goes up and above the range, you will always get at least maybe 10,000 tokens from that envelope. So in that case, your value, the value you will get, will be linearly grow along with the grow by against the price, by the price. So it would be interesting. It's very smart. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I would love to understand kind of like the mindset of the customers. So, like, people who are launching these variable, like, what is the selling point? I think, to me, I think you mentioned kind of this feeling of maybe assurance or insurance, uh, but I
Little
would love
bit.
to kind of get more detail.
It's more like a bond for the project, for the protocols. They issue bonds, especially in bearish market, to raise fund, So if they do their work well, they can sell a little bit fewer tokens by this contract. But
Oh,
if
that's
they
cool.
didn't, if they don't do it well, they have to pay more tokens to their buyers. That this is more like a a bond style financial
Wow.
instrument. But for the buyers, they get more protection, right? They get more
Yes.
protection. If the price drop, they can get more tokens. So especially in the bearish market, they can they can have a cooler head entering this market. Yeah.
That's terrific. So, it's so interesting to see these types of products, and it's just really a sign of maturation and sophistication. So, these are really great tools. So,
Thank
um,
you.
how did you kind of get interested in these ideas? Like, how did this start?
Um, Actually, the vesting voucher is somewhat original. Was original idea from us. We
Yeah.
would like to develop a tools to help the investors, institutional investors, to handle their so-called unlocking or their vesting schedule, right? So it's a original idea from us, but the convertible voucher is we were driven by our partners, by our users. They told us what they want,
That's
especially
great.
yeah, especially when the market goes when bearish. People told us that during a bear market, we would like to be more protected. So, would you like to enhance your vesting vouchers to offer me such features? Okay, that's why we
Amazing.
come here. Yeah.
That's so cool. And, it's exciting to see this kind of collaborative product development. So, one thing I'm always curious about is sort of, how did you come into crypto personally, like yourself? And like, what everyone
Yeah.
has such an interesting origin story. So, what got you
Yes.
interested?
Yes. And that's always a story I would like to tell. I
Great.
used to be an IBM employee. Yeah. Um, I used to work for IBM Australia. I remember the exact date. The exact time is the summer of 2015. So during
Mhm.
that time, IBM, the new IBM CTO, called us to pay more attention to a new technology called blockchain. And he said, by the way, he is now the CEO of IBM. Yeah,
Oh,
and
wow.
yes, back to that date, he is new IT CTO of IBM. He called us to learn to study a new technology called blockchain, and so I did. So I learned a lot from the online courses, provided by Princeton universities, and I read a lot of some books, and I learned the pretty new, brand new project called Ethereum. So that's that's a time point I got stepped into
Wow.
this field, and in 2017, I got back to China for family reasons, and I decided to quit from IBM and start my own career in the crypto. And but in the first few years, I play a role as educator, evangelist, and trainer, and consultant. I didn't have a good idea on how to start a really innovative project, and I don't want to cheat people. Back to
Yeah.
those days,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people start a sheet project just to cheat people to make money with some viper promise, with some
Yep.
Ponzi schemes.
Yes.
I didn't want to do that. Uh, but yeah, but you may not know that during during the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, I was in Wuhan. So
Oh my.
I was
Oh
there.
my
Yeah,
gosh.
I was there, and I was locked for about 5 months. So I
Wow.
have plenty of time to think how I should do in the next step. And then we both, all of us, witnessed the summer of DeFi, right? The DeFi summer, and I was clicked, and I think, yes, this is the right way. I should go. We should go, because DeFi is something real. DeFi is, they make real profit. So it's the first, I think it's the first business, real business we got in the blockchain industry. So I formed this new team. I call my old friend Will Wang and my new friend Ryan Cho. We formed this team. We invest in the company. I should say, I should not say company. We invest in the project, in the protocol,
Yeah.
with our own savings, with our family, with the funds raised from
Wonderful.
our families and from friends. Yeah, in the beginning, it's only about 500,000 US dollars, or maybe lesser. So we started this a project, and we came out with this idea. In the very beginning, what we want to do is we want to do a better version of MakerDAO to
Oh, wow.
tokenize, yes, to tokenize and liquidize the vaults of MakerDAO. Right today,
Yeah.
the MakerDAO vaults cannot be transferred. Right, so we want to tokenize the vaults of MakerDAO. But eventually, we realize that we were doing something much bigger. We are trying to tokenize smart contract itself. So that's
Yeah.
how we
Amazing.
we step by step, come to this point.
No, it's so amazing, right? Because one of the big innovations that launched the DeFi movement was compound finance, right? With the C token
Yes,
structure, right? So the idea that you
yes,
can tokenize, these kinds of instruments, it's so fascinating
yes.
because I think what you've done is even more atomic, right? Which is that you're tokenizing the smart contract, which I think is really
Yes.
novel.
Yeah, thank you,
That's
thank you. And
amazing.
and I was very great when you say semi fungible in the very beginning, because actually what we have done is not NFT. So to be honest, financial NFT is not a literally NFT. It's a new
Ha.
it's new type of token, semi fungible token. So SFT is a correct name, but I know that we don't want to, you know,
Confuse people.
post a new name to the domain. So
Yeah.
to make people more easier to make people easier to understand, we just use a financial NFT. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I wanted to talk about fractionalization because I think it's very cool.
Yes.
So, so tell me
Yes.
about what semi-fungible means. I know, but the audience maybe doesn't know.
Yes. So by semi-fungible token, I mean this token is both fungible and non-fungible. It actually sit somewhere between fungible and non-fungible. Okay. By fungible, we mean that the two tokens, the two financial NFTs, if they are the same breed, they are the same type, you can combine them, you can add them up, right? So that means that if you have two uh, vesting voucher with the same type, uh, one has a face value 20, the other has a face value 80, then you can combine them. You can merge them to be a new financial NFT. A new vesting voucher with a face value 100. Likewise, you can divide them in two. You can divide it a face value 100 vesting voucher to two different vesting vouchers with 30 and 70 respectively. Okay, so this by this mean we call it fungible, but it's also non fungible because it's conformed to all the interface requirements of ERC 721. For the audience who know what ERC 721, you must know that it's the standard for to describe the non-fungible tokens. So that means this semi-fungible token, the most important thing is that it has face, it has a user interface. So you can have metadata to describe it looks like. So this is impossible for an ERC20 fungible token. And having saying that, in the non-fungible token can do much more. A non-fungible token can enclose or can encapsulate logic, so more it can be smarter, it can be intelligence. So we actually encapsulate logical codes into a semi-fungible token, so make it smart, make it intelligent, so it can interact with the environment, it can react to to events, you can trigger
So,
it to make
so,
it.
so Yeah. So
Please.
before we go to kind of the intelligence embedded
Hmm.
within this semi-fungible token, right? I just wanted to kind of give the audience sort of a simple way of understanding this thing, right? Which is that um it's funny when you go into like ancient ruins, like sometimes you see a coin, right? And it's a coin that's designed to break in half, right? So in a sense, like it's like
Yes.
you just take this value, right, and you're like, okay, I want half, right? So you can just break it and then you have now half a coin, right? And so in a
Yes.
way, like but the thing that's really cool about semi-fungibility is that unlike such a coin, you can actually now fuse the, I mean, obviously if you have some kind of blacksmith, you can heat it up, right, and you can glue the thing back together, right? So you can do it, but like I think the feeling is so interesting because it sort of really makes things very financially divisible, and I think that's what that's one of the foundational properties of a money, right? So it's, is that,
Yes,
money has
yes.
this divisibility, which is why the Bitcoin's Satoshi unit is so exciting, right? Because it's fractional, like highly fractionalizable, right? So in a way, like you're just following this perfect property of money. So I'd love to understand what you're saying about the embedded code, because I'm still struggling with it. Like what's the container that executes the code, and what's an example of code that could sit inside, what kind of logic, when does it execute, like who executes it, and like what does it do, like any by example, like you could do anything, of course, because it's software, but like what's an example of something that you would like it to do?
Okay, I will give you two examples. One is still vesting voucher. It's a simpler, but it's a entry point, right? And I will explain you the other uh, type of financial NFT we are developing. Um, that is the financial NFT for the NFT leasing and the rent and leasing. Okay, first of all, first example is. The vesting voucher. So the vesting voucher, it's not just a voucher. It's not just a magic. It's not just an envelope. It's an envelope with logic embedded, with intelligence embedded. So it can feel, it can measure the time, so that it knows when and how much you can take from this envelope. So it can measure the time. Think this is the only way it's interact with its environment. It's feel the time collapse and
Wow,
decided when and how many tokens you can take from
it's like a
from that
robot.
envelope. It's like a robot. Yes, exactly, exactly. And now let me give you a more interesting example. That is what we're calling leasing contract. So today, think about this. I know Gumi invests a lot into the GameFi, right? GameFi space.
Yes.
Um, uh, you must have vision in that in the near future there will be quite a large of so-called gaming equipment rent and leasing market, right?
Yes.
For
Yes.
example, you have very powerful equipment. Let's say it's a laser gun, but you don't have time to play it, right? And I have time and I have the skill, but I don't have money. I cannot afford to buy the equipment from you. So the best
Yeah.
idea is that I can rent it from you, so that I
Yeah.
play in the Axie Infinity or in other games, and I can pay your rent, or even I can share with you the profit I earn, right? Uh, but today, you just can't do that, because to doing that, you have to transfer the ownership of the NFT to me. And once it transferred, what if I don't? It returned it to you. What you can do? What you can do to me? What you can do to punish me? You have no idea. You have no way to do that,
I
right?
can come to your house. I'm
Yes.
kidding. Okay.
Yeah, that means you can only do this among familiars,
Yeah, yeah,
among familiarities, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Agree, agree.
So that will severely limited the market growth.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so how to address this problem in financial NFT or in so-called vouchers? We are developing a new technology that is we actually divide the NFT by the rights. We separate the right of use from the ownership. So we
Yeah,
you give me an NFT representing the right of use, and you keep a stub. I would call it a stub. It's also an NFT. It's a stub, and representing the ownership. So we will have an contract between us. I use your NFT to play the game, and I have to regularly pay you the rent. And if I keep on pay you the rent, the the smart contract will be in a normal state. But if someday I failed, I didn't pay you the rent, the smart contract will be set to invalid or a so-called default state. In that state, you with your stub NFT can unconditionally, withdraw the NFT I have in my hand, and then you will get everything restored. So think about this: how many intelligence we encapsulate in these two NFTs and in that smart contract. This is kind of robot, uh, in your language, a robot, a very intelligent and powerful robot, and we are doing that. So that is the meaning that how we embed the intelligence into financial NFTs or vouchers, according to our terminology. So I think
Yeah. So,
these two
but
examples,
but when you
please.
talk about embedding the intelligence, right? Like in a
Yeah,
way, like you've tokenized the smart contract, right? So
yeah.
where is the logic stored and where is it executed?
the the code is still somewhere in sitting somewhere in the blockchain, but we actually using our NFT to represent the the right to access, to execute, to trigger
Ah,
the code. So
I see.
technically, we are just a middleware between the, the blockchain infrastructure and the applications.
Wow. So let me try to describe this back to you and see if I understand this,
Okay,
right? Which is that what
please.
you create is you create this kind of crazy machine, right? So let's say the machine is a smart contract that has vesting, right? So what happens
Yeah,
with this machine is that the machine takes all of your rights, all of your vesting rights and contract, and it pops out a token, right? But what you're
that's right.
saying is that I can actually go now and take that token and stick it in another machine, and that machine will execute code, and then I'll get my token back, right? So you're basically like you're using it's almost like a Chuck E. Cheese, right? Like that you have the coin now and you can use it on another smart contract, right? And if you don't have this, you can't use the contract, right? You're just that's interesting.
Yeah, basically is that, when people first came out the idea of smart contract, they use an example of, you know uh, automatic vendor machine, the automatic vendor machine, right? So uh, uh, so think about that. If
Yeah,
that
yeah. I
automatic
think I
yeah,
think I think you're thinking of Nick Szabo.
yeah, Nick Szabo, yes, when Nick
Yeah,
Szabo
yeah, yeah.
first
And
conceived.
you know who else was doing stuff back then is like Mark Miller from Agoric, right? Like the Agoric guys were working with Nick Szabo to kind of
Yeah,
get the very beginning of smart contract, right? But of course, you're absolutely right. The way Nick Szabo describes is vending machine, right? It's very much
vending machine,
so it's like an
yes.
arcade machine or a slot machine or a vending machine. Like they're all the same feeling of like you put the coin in, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, when Nick Szabo first conceived the smart contract, he used the example of vending machine, and think about if there is a special vending machine that is not for everybody, just for a specific group of people. Uh, that machine issues a special kind of tickets. Only when you
Yes.
have the tickets, you can use that vending machine. So that is basically how we, implement the smart contract tokenization in Solve.
That's so cool. Like I to me, like this is
Thank
so
you.
great because I like this kind of very fundamental reasoning, right? So like It's sort of like
Thank you.
like Robert Leshner invented like the C token, which sort of tokenizes your lending contract, right? So it's sort of like, well,
Yes,
why don't you
yes.
tokenize the smart contract, right? But the thing that's so funny about this token is kind of like, now what, right? So obviously you can fractionalize it, like you can resell it, and then you can defractionalize it, right? So you can reassemble it, and then you can put it into another contract and get services execution, like so it's fascinating.
Thank you.
It's so
Thank you.
interesting. Makes me
Thank
feel
you.
like I'm in a arcade. When I was a little kid, we would go to an arcade and buy arcade tokens, like Chuck E. Cheese tokens, right? And you
Yes,
can put them in any
yes,
machine, right? And you can get all kinds of gameplay.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
That's
Good.
that's terrific. So tell me kind of your motivations. Like, what are the things that get you excited? It can be in the industry, but it could also be any inspiration. So you could be like, I'm excited about like ping pong or anything you want. So like, what gets you excited, motivated?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it's not only my motivation. We have a team, over 30 people there,
Yeah.
and especially the core partners. We share the same vision, we share the same dream. Um, that is, we want to make, blockchain easy to use for everyone, for every common people, for every citizen people, not just programmers, developers, gurus. Today, I don't know what you think, but I think blockchain is such a powerful tool that has a potential to uproot everything, everything. But the problem today is that it's too damn difficult to use it. It's too damn
Yes.
hard to use it, right? For example, take the smart contract as an example. A smart contract is so powerful, but can you interact with a smart contract? No. You need to be a developer, to be a programmer, and use use a set of tools to interact with the smart contract, to set the argument, to trigger, to ask it to execute. How about the common people? How about the normal citizen, right? They have no idea, and they often to become the victim of some high tech
Yeah,
vicious
rug pull.
guys.
Rug pull.
Yeah, yeah, rug pull. So what we are doing is that we want to simplify the blockchain technology so that we can make everybody can easily use the smart contract, use the cryptocurrency, crypto asset with a cool head. With a cool head, they can full of confidence that they can interact with the smart contract with a easy to use interface, and they're zero worried about the fraudulent
Yeah.
code, the vicious code, and they can do they can buy, combine and compose different smart contract, in my terminology, different vouchers to compose their own logic, financial logic, so that you know we will at the end of the day we will have that so-called I should say, let me think of the word, democratize the
Yeah.
financial, decentralize and democratize financial sector. Yeah.
That's amazing, right? So you're really thinking hard about kind of how to make interaction simple, right? So in a sense, then you're really thinking about kind of making these smart contracts into assets, right? Because then people can really then just consume the asset, right? So maybe that's the
Yes,
interface that makes this complex logic, more consumable. That's interesting.
that's right,
Uh,
consumable.
so, how are you thinking about sort of the user interface or user interaction model in the future, right? Because obviously, if you think
Mhm.
about like an OpenSea approach, then you can have a variety of different kinds of tokens that you can offer, right? And then the question becomes like, how does that make it easy for the user? They could potentially be confused by how many different kinds of things you can do.
Okay, yes. That's a very good question. One thing I'm a little bit curious is why people didn't see one of the most important strength of NFT is that it has a face. It has a UI, right? It's
Yes.
visible. So people rarely mention that, but I think that is one of the greatest strength of NFT. So
Yes.
uh, that's why in the first place we decided to use NFT to do the work. We by using NFT to represent a financial contract, we will give we will make it consumable, as you just said. We will enable a common people to set the conditions, set the arguments, the parameters, to customize the the financial constructs, the financial instruments or financial contracts, right? But the question you just asked is there will be maybe hundreds or even thousands of different financial instrument or financial
Yeah.
contracts. How can we manage that? Uh, I think according to me, we only need to produce less than 10 templates that we can cover 80% of the real world transaction demands.
Great.
That is a bold statement, a bold uh, hypothesis, but uh, I have carefully think about that, and we have carefully think about that, and we think less than 10, literally less than 10 templates, and then you can literally you can virtually produce most of the financial contracts you want. So that's the way. We don't want to declare that we can solve every problem in the world, but we can relatively leverage our method to to solve most of the problems, most of the issues that people encountered in their transactions,
Yeah.
in their
Yeah.
business. Yeah.
So tell me a bit about what's next in like the roadmap. Like what are you planning to release? What are the next big things?
Yeah. The next big things will be around middle of this year. That is the so-called installment leasing and group buying market. We will deploy that for the NFT market. So imagine an open sea that enable you to do installment purchasing, to do leasing and renting, and to do a group buying. A group of people buy a so-called for example crypto punk, right? Because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Why not we tens of people buy one. So that is the next big things of Solve. We will support that. And the what followed is a technology upgrade to the financial NFT, to the voucher itself. That is, we will enable it. We will make it a account type, so that a voucher or a financial NFT can send token to others or receive tokens from others. So it's more like transferable wallet. So we will upgrade it to become a account type. So this is what we can see in the near future that will greatly enhance the product and the technology.
One thing I'm very curious about payment installments, right? Is
Yes.
that because NFTs are a very volatile market, right?
Yes.
One thing that someone could do is initiate a large number of installment payments, right? Expecting to default on many of them if the token price, if the NFT price, floor price changes too much, right? They could default on many of them, right? And then if one of them starts going crazy in price, right, then they've locked in a good price, right? So they just take the loss on all of the defaults. So they just default on most things, and then they just happily pay the rest of this installments, and then they have the NFT, which is now worth $1 million. So like, so how do you prevent this kind of an attack on installment?
Yeah. The risk caused by the price volatility cannot
Yes.
be avoided. Somebody have to take the risk.
Yes.
So
Yes.
in the installment, so in the installment model, we have two approaches. Two roles to take the risk. One is a seller. So the
Yes.
seller agree to sell the NFT to the buyers by installment plan. So he agreed to take only the down payment and transfer the ownership to the buyers. But we will give him a stop so that if the guy violate default the agreement, he can take back the original NFT as what happened in the leasing story, right?
Yes.
But still, when he take back the NFT, it's a price dropped NFT, so the price has dropped, so he has to take the the the
The risk.
the risk. Yeah, but a good point is that by this model he can boost the sales, right? He can boost the sales in the first place. And remember that for most of the creators, the majority of the profit comes not from the first sales, from the initial sales, but from the loyalty in the following transaction. So we can still guarantee that in the following transactions he can get the loyalty. So I think many of the artists, many of the creators are still would still accept this instrument model and take the risk. But we have a improved model for that. That is, we got a third, a third. I should say the third, like a bank. I should say,
Yeah.
the third guy who get into this into transaction and would like to pay the buyers the full price and take the stop take the stop NFT and to manage the risk.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would
That
yeah I would say
that model makes sense.
yes. That would be some third party protocols like a Taker. They are doing the NFT collateralization, NFT lending, things like that, and they would be coming to this scenario and evaluate the NFTs and to provide the service, provide the liquidity to facilitate the transaction. Let's see what will happen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm very excited for the future. I know that it's a very bright future for you. I think you've invented some
Thank you.
incredibly fundamental technologies. So, really looking forward to this near roadmap. So, thanks so much for
Yeah.
spending time on the Miko Bits
Thank
show.
you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Miko. See you
Okay.
next time.